Well, thank you, Loretta and Diane and everyone with the MPS for inviting me back to speak again. As Loretta mentioned, I do have top billing in this film, so it's always exciting to talk about your work. As you may have put together by my mustache, I have never been a teenage girl and would not be fit to play one in this film, but there are a lot of subject matters and things running through this film that are very personal, relatable to me. So this film is set in Lady Bird's senior year of high school, which is 2002 to 2003. My senior year of high school was 2003 to 2004. And while I didn't graduate from a parochial school, I did attend one for a very long period. And I also was someone who fancied New York as a place where culture existed and did not think of Detroit as such, and often wanted to move away in high school, I think much to my parents' dismay. So this film rings true on a lot of levels for me. I think it has a very strong directorial voice, and it's important to kick that off by discussing Greta Gerwig a little bit. I first saw Greta Gerwig in if you know me well, you know that I love horror films, and I'll shoehorn them into any discussion I can. So I first saw Greta Gerwig in a film called House of the Devil, which is a very slow-burning, atmospheric horror film from 2009. And in addition to getting a chance to recommend that you all see that film, it was directed by a man named Ty West. And Greta Gerwig has a very small role in it, but she very easily catches your eye because she has such charisma on the screen. Ty West and Greta Gerwig are both prominent players in a film movement from the mid-2000s called mumblecore. Not too many well-known films from there to recommend, but they are often directed by young filmmakers. They're low budget, shot on video. They often deal with relationships as seen from the perspective of 20-somethings. They improvise a lot of the dialogue in these films. They prioritize like a naturalistic acting style. And Greta Gerwig got her first bit of directing experience in a film called Nights and Weekends. One of the prominent directors in the mumblecore, as it's so labeled by critics, movement, was Joe Swanberg. And he did a film in which he and Greta Gerwig are in a long-distance relationship called Nights and Weekends. And Gerwig co-wrote that and directed it with him. From there, in 2010, Greta Gerwig starred in a film called Greenberg with Ben Stiller. It's directed by Noah Baumbach. From there, she entered into a relationship with Baumbach that I believe they're still going strong to this day. And once they started dating, they co-wrote a film called Frances Ha, which was playing as you walked in. Just out of curiosity, has anyone in here seen Frances Ha before? Only a handful? I thought it'd be fun to show it while people were walking in because Lady Bird is sort of the spiritual prequel to Frances Ha. Frances Ha is about a 27-year-old woman living in Brooklyn, who has moved there from Sacramento to attend college and is still living there, and she's kind of struggling to pay her rent, struggling to find her career, struggling to find her path. And I think right around 1 o'clock when most of the people were gathering in, you may have noticed that she goes home to Sacramento for Christmas. Those are her real parents in that scene. So if you just out of curiosity, how many people have seen Lady Bird? Everyone? Some? Cool. Most of the audience. So if you enjoyed Lady Bird, I'd recommend checking out Frances Ha, because it is, again, like a spiritual sequel to this film. Greta Gerwig started writing Lady Bird, and at one point Noah Baumbach was planning to direct it, but Gerwig decided to venture out into her first solo directing effort and chose to direct it, which is probably a wise move because while her personality is very strong in Frances Ha, I feel like you feel her voice even more so behind the camera than in front of it with this film. And while most of us have seen Lady Bird, I wanted to start with the first 5 minutes of the movie, so if you haven't seen it, this is a good little introduction to the world of the film. A couple things to watch for. We're going to start with a conversation between Lady Bird and her mother. The camera is mounted on a car, so in theory it is moving, but in this opening little bit of the stretch of the movie, try and notice how often you see the camera move, meaning, tilt up and down, pan left to right, glide, do anything. And then watch the rhythm of the editing, see how long shots last typically when you go. We're going to start with kind of a long drawn-out scene between her and her mother. We'll see that Lady Bird typically jumps into all the situations in her life and the predicaments of this movie. And we'll get a little opening title sequence that's going to introduce us to a lot of the subplots and minor characters throughout the film. So, Diane, whenever you're ready, go ahead and hit it. So I'm sure we're all well aware, having just come out of awards season, that Lady Bird definitely got a lot of attention this year, mainly for Gerwig script and direction behind the camera, but also for the mother-daughter relationship that's at the heart of the movie. For Saoirse Ronan, and then Laurie Metcalf, who in particular I think was robbed this year. I think she gave maybe the best performance out of anyone. just personal opinion, but a couple places that this film didn't really get recognized was in some of the technical areas. Sam Levy, who photographed it, was also the director of photography for Francis Ha, and I think this movie is beautifully photographed, but especially it is wonderfully edited. Much of this film is the mother-daughter tension and kind of drawn-out scenes that then explodes to these very long kind of montages where a lot of information is conveyed visually. I think this opening does a great job of where you are, what the mood is. You know, there's a little 9/11 doesn't get mentioned often, but you get a quick second shot of it that puts you in the right framework. You know, it's disappointing that it didn't get nominated for editing because that's something that I want to highlight today while we talk about it. Kind of that staccato style that you see, which is we're jumping in and around time, back and forth. It also does a great job at introducing you to several of the smaller subplots and minor characters that we see throughout here. Her best friend kind of has an infatuation with their math teacher, which you get introduced into here quickly. A few things like that. Gerwig's voice is so strong that it often feels like you're watching an autobiographical story. Gerwig has gone on record to say that she wasn't much of a rebel in high school, much more of a rule follower, and that Lady Bird sort of is who she wanted to be when she was in high school. A couple of true autobiographical elements, though. She did attend an all-girls Catholic school. She did grow up in Sacramento. And on top of her love for Lady Bird, much like Loretta sort of alluded to in her opening, there's a deep love for the city of Sacramento in here. One of my favorite things in films is to see a place you don't often see represented in film done so in a loving manner, and that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about Lady Bird. I have one more clip that I want to show you, and we'll get there in a moment. But it's going to follow a similar pattern to what we see here, which is mother-daughter in a certain circumstance. They're trying to be respectful of each other. They're trying to do a common good for one another. But it kind of blows up. And then we see a lot of those staccato edits telling the story of Thanksgiving. But before we get there, I want to talk about coming-of-age tropes, because if you ask me to wedge Lady Bird into a film genre, it would probably be the coming-of-age story. So before we watch this clip, a couple things that you're not going to see. By the time we show this next clip, Lady Bird has auditioned for her school play. She's began pursuing the boy who is the lead actor in the play. Her dad loses his job. You see that there's a lot of stress at home. She goes to a dance with the new boyfriend, and they kiss. And that's sort of where we pick up right here. And in most coming-of-age stories, we see this big transformative moment that sets them on this new path of life they're going to follow. So a couple things you're not going to see in this scene. Lady Bird does not land the lead role in the high school play and find her path to a scholarship at college or have a transformative experience where she finds her path in life through acting. She's going to do drugs, but she's not going to fall off the rails and come into a conflict with her parents and lose her studies and find her path to college obstructed. And she's not going to experience this new side of Sacramento, which is the wealthy side, and abandon all the things that her family sort of instilled in her. So let's go ahead and watch the next clip, and we'll kind of see what happens with Lady Bird. All right. So again, traditionally what would kick off Act 2 of a movie where we get the big conflict that sort of sets the rest of the film into motion, that's going to make Lady Bird, quote unquote, come of age, which I often say is for someone to have a transformative experience that allows them to walk away wiser. That's not really what we get in this film. We don't see Thanksgiving dinner from either perspective at Mom's house or at Lady Bird's boyfriend's grandma's house. We don't see a transformative experience where she's finds herself in the lead role of a play. We just see that theater continues to play a large role in her life and how she interacts with her friends. The main way that this movie comes of age is the way it happens in real life often, which is Lady Bird keeps getting a little bit older and keeps growing as life keeps moving on. No big obstacles present themselves. We do see that she's trying to get into a better college than she might get into, but not exactly make or break life circumstances. So it's always exciting to talk about a new movie. I think we're going to do a Q&A afterwards, so I'd be happy to maybe field some more observations or questions from the audience, but that about does it for my presentation portion. So I look forward to seeing what Greta Gerwig does next, and yeah, I'll hand it over to Don. So, great.